Joel David Rifkin is an American serial killer who murdered at least 17 women, primarily prostitutes, between 1989 and 1993 in New York City. His crimes were discovered when a routine traffic stop on June 28, 1993, led police to find the decomposing body of his last victim, Tiffany Bresciani, in his pickup truck. This arrest led to a shocking confession in which Rifkin detailed his 4-year killing spree, making him New York's most prolific serial killer. He was convicted of 9 murders and sentenced to 203 years to life in prison. So let's see how this serial killer was made, or was he just born that way? Joel David Rifkin was born on the 20th of January, 1959 to a teenage couple who weren't ready to take on the responsibility of being parents. He was adopted by Bernard and Jean Rifkin when he was just 21 days old. He also had an adopted sister, Jan, and he lived with his adoptive parents in East Meadow, Long Island, New York. Joel went to Prospect Avenue Elementary School, where he was targeted by bullies from the get-go. Joel had a slouching posture and slow walk, and this made him stand out. He was called names like Turtle. He had his pants pulled down. He had his books stolen. He was constantly bullied and harassed by his peers. As a result, he didn't or couldn't participate in games with kids his own age, either at school or in his own neighborhood. As an adopted child, he may have developed psychological problems and grown with feelings of abandonment, identity confusion, or low self-esteem. Not every child experiences this. However, it's not uncommon. Joel was a timid and awkward boy. He was also dyslexic, which means he had a disability whereby he had difficulties with reading and writing. However, he had a high IQ and was therefore deemed intellectual, but unfortunately, due to his disability, he performed poorly at school. His dyslexia was also undiagnosed for the first part of his life. His parents couldn't understand the reason behind his poor grades, and Bernard constantly berated him for it. Joel would soon pass to East Meadow High School, and his life went from bad to worse. The bullying continued. He had a nerdy outward appearance, and during sporting activities, his teammates would hide his clothes in the locker rooms and drown his head in a toilet bowl. However, Joel would continue trying to make friends with his tormentors, even inviting them back to his house. He would later on join the yearbook staff at his high school, and after laboring to do a good job in putting out the yearbook, he was excluded from the end-of-year party. His mother recalls he was so devastated. He tried dating, however, his tormentors would chase him and corner him in the school gym and pelt him with eggs. Once he and his date were chased until they ran to the public library and hid for safety. As a teenager, his parents had given him a car, and he was known to solicit prostitutes with it. He had a keen interest in them, growing his stash of pornographic paraphernalia. He starts fantasizing about bondage and rape. He would reveal to a true crime author his daydreams were of 2 female gladiators fighting to the death. Sometimes he dreamed of raping and stabbing women. He later on fixates upon strangling prostitutes. As a young boy, Joel had taken a particular interest in horticulture and photojournalism, probably inspired by his mother, Jean's passion for photography. This likely because he ended up spending more time at home with her. His mother was unaware of his issue with bullies and simply thought he was a loner. Joel graduated from high school and went to community college and then on to University of New York. School wasn't his forte as he was restless and skipped most of his classes. He dropped out of college and restarted a number of times, unable to focus. He worked odd jobs, including working as a photographer for his school's newspaper. However, they were only ever short-term, and he was unable to advance in his life. He was unable to leave home because he couldn't hold a steady job, so had no way of supporting himself. Many years later, while incarcerated, Joel would narrate how he couldn't put 2 nickels together. His focus was on the streets, where he was taken advantage of by both the prostitutes he sought after and their pimps. He was deceived by the same prostitute 2 times when she fled after he paid her before sex. He was known to solicit prostitutes, and it's thought it's where most of his wages was used. In 1987, when Joel was 28, his adoptive father Bernard, who had been suffering from cancer for some time, decided to take his life. Bernard had been a heavy smoker and battled emphysema. The year prior to committing suicide, he was diagnosed with prostate cancer. One day, Barnard took an overdose of some pills, When he was found almost lifeless, he was rushed to the hospital, where he would never return from. Barnard was in a coma for 4 days before finally giving up the ghost. This plunged Joel, who was already affected by the psychological effects of his adoptive birth and life of being bullied and abused, into a deep depression. He was left with his adoptive mother and sister. It was at this time that he suddenly becomes fascinated with violence, murder, and prostitution. He began collecting articles and clippings of serial killers, becoming even more obsessed with them. In 1987, on one of his usual curb-crawling, noctivagant strolls, he solicits a prostitute, but is caught by the police and detained. It turns out the prostitute was an undercover police officer. He pays his bail and returns home and doesn't reveal anything about his ordeal to his sister and mother. In 1988, Joel enrolled yet again into college to study horticulture for 2 years. And for the first time in his life, he's a straight-A student bagging an internship at Planting Fields Arboretum in Oyster Bay, New York. While at the College of Technology, Farmingdale, New York, he secretly desires a colleague. She's pretty petite and blonde. However, she ignores his advances, which frustrates him. As time progresses, so does his obsession for violence and murder, and he gradually makes the shift to becoming a full-blown murderer and serial killer. By now, he has so much pent-up anger and rage just waiting to explode. He's done enough schooling on the matter already. All he needs now is a target. Still living at his family home with his mother one day, Jean goes on a trip for a month, and Joel seizes the opportunity to bring his long-awaited fantasies to life. At 10 p.m. one night in March 1989, Joel was on the prowl looking for a prostitute. He drives to neighboring towns to avoid being so close to home. There in Manhattan, he picked up a girl named Susie. Susie was a call girl addicted to crack. On their drive to his home in Long Island, Susie requested several stops along the way to purchase crack. After sex, Joel battered her with a howitzer shell that could have weighed upwards of 20 kilograms. But Susie was still alive, and when Joel tried to move her, she began to fight back, biting Joel on his finger, reigniting his rage. Then in one more move, he strangles her to death. After the turmoil, Joel stuffs Susie's lifeless body into a black bin bag and goes to sleep. He wakes up several hours later to finish the kill. He drags the black bin bags containing Susie's body down into the basement, where he cuts off her head. As if he knew how to evade identification of a body, he cuts off her fingertips and pulls out her teeth with a pair of pliers. He put Susie's head into an old paint bucket, and the rest of her body parts went into more black bin bags, and he loaded the boot of his mother's car with the black bin bags and used paint bucket and drove across state lines to Hopewell, New Jersey, and disposes of the old paint bucket and some of the black bin bags in the woods, then drives back home through Manhattan, stopping at the East River, and disposes of the remaining black bin bags. A golfer from the Hopewell Valley Golf Club came across the old paint bucket containing Susie's head. The police were unable to identify her remains, and she remained missing unknown person until Joel confessed to killing her when he was caught 4 years later. About a year after Susie's murder, Joel is on the hunt again for a new victim to unleash his anger. He picks up a working girl named Julie and takes her to his home in East Meadow, where they have sex. They both fall asleep. At 9 a.m. the next morning, Joel wakes up, and taking a table leg, he beats Julie severely, then he strangles her. He'd been working on a different disposal method. He dismembered Julie's corpse and put her body parts into buckets filled with cement. Most likely, he would have let the cement set before disposing of the buckets in the East River and into a canal in Brooklyn. Her remains were never found. The following year, in 1991, Joel rented a space to store his equipment for a new landscaping venture he'd started. He would also use this property to store bodies of his victims from time to time. As usual, Joel picks up another prostitute named Barbara from the Manhattan area and drives her back home, where he has sex with her. As the same as his previous victim, he beats her with a table leg and strangles her. Joel had decided on a deviation in his modus operandi, and unlike his previous victim, he wraps Barbara's body in plastic and then forced her body into a cardboard box. He would return to dismembering later on. He put the cardboard box in the back of his mother's Toyota pickup truck and drove to the Hudson River, where he disposed of it. Hours later, firefighters on a training exercise spotted the cardboard box, and discovering the body concealed within it, the police are called. The coroner ruled her death as a drug overdose, and she was buried in an unmarked grave until Joel confessed to her murder. As a serial murderer, Joel is now comfortable and picks up his pace. Joel would go on to murder 3 more people that year. On the 1st of September, 1991, Joel was driving around Queens and picked up 22-year-old Mary. They go to a motel where he strangles her after sex. Without his tools of trade, he leaves the motel to purchase a steamer trunk. He hides Mary's body in the steamer trunk and puts it into his car. He abandoned the steamer trunk at a rest stop in Orange County. She was found a month later badly decomposed, so it was impossible to identify her, and she was buried in an unmarked grave. Only a few weeks later, Joel was on the prowl again. He'd been soliciting prostitutes regularly and just chose to kill when he felt like it. His next victim was someone he'd solicited before. He strangled her and stuffed her body in the same steamer trunk he'd used only weeks before, then dumped her body in the East River. She was found in the following weeks floating in the river. She was identified by her ex-husband. Joel would go on to kill several more women he picked up as prostitutes. They were either trying to fund a habit or a lifestyle and turned to tricks. It was 1992, and he was on a rampage, all the while he was never caught. His victims were junkies, and they were not a priority. The bodies of dead, missing prostitutes were popping up in water bodies, concealed in used oil barrels. Sometimes they were found bare in dump sites. Joel had been soliciting for 2 days and had just come upon his 4th hooker. It was the 24th of June, 1993. Joel picked up a prostitute and drove to a parking lot where he strangled her and put her into the trunk of his car. He drove her body home to East Meadow. His mother took her car keys from Joel when he got back and went shopping. Unbeknownst to her, there was a body in the trunk. However, when she returns from her shopping trip, Joel transfers the body of the prostitute from the trunk of the car to the garage, where he leaves the body in a wheelbarrow. He leaves the body there for 4 days. It's summer and the heat causes the corpse to decompose. In the early hours of the morning on the 28th of June, 1993, 2 officers had been working the night shift. A pickup truck drove ahead of them. It wasn't speeding, but they noticed it didn't have a registration plate. They did all they could to get the truck to stop so they could write the driver a ticket, but the driver just kept on going as if there was nobody there. They call for backup, and the truck begins to speed, being chased by 5 police car sirens blaring. At some point, the truck eventually crashed into a lamppost at an intersection in Mineola. The 2 officers clamber out of their police vehicle and approach the driver of the truck with their guns drawn. They identify Joel from his driver's license. They can see he looks untidy and there's a layer of cream on his beard. They learn it's shaving cream, a trick to reduce the impact of the stench of the decomposing bodies. This was a hack he'd taken from the movie Silence of the Lambs. As they approach the truck, they perceive the foul odor of rotten, decomposing flesh as they find a long object wrapped in plastic. They find a woman's body in the plastic. They immediately arrest Joel, who narrated that he killed the 22-year-old prostitute named Tiffany Bresciani after having sex with her, and that he was driving to Republic Airport to dispose of the body. It would later turn out she was the girlfriend of a member of a musical band. She happened to be out that night tricking to fund her drug habit. In custody, Rifkin confesses to all the murders that he'd committed in the past 4 years, from Susie to Tiffany, all prostitutes he claimed, 17 in number. Of his 17 murders, he described how he butchered and dismembered some, while others were strangled, stuffed into bin bags, and thrown into the Hudson River. One was forced into a cardboard box, another into a steamer trunk. Sometimes he stuffed his victim's body into an oil drum. The police called his mother, Jean, and informed her of her son's accident. However, the full story would unfold on television that day. The police soon swamped the home of Gene Rifkin, where they recover souvenirs he took from his victims. They find ID cards, credit card, driver licenses, jewelry, and clothing. In his garage, they find a wheelbarrow and a chainsaw stained with human remains. They find a diary belonging to his second victim, Julie, and are convinced Joel murdered her when he confessed to her murder. Joel may have confessed to murdering the woman, but when asked to enter his plea, he pled not guilty. His lawyer sought to have his confession thrown out on a technicality, being the police never advised him of his rights. And the next move was to find his client not guilty by reason of insanity. The assistant district attorney offered Joel 46 years to life for all murders in return for a guilty plea, but Joel refused. The judge rejected Joel's defense motions, and a trial date was set. A witness for the state, Dr. Dietz, stated Rifkin was sick, but not insane. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he did it. After all the trials for the murders he was convicted of, Rifkin is found guilty of 9 counts of murder. As there was no death penalty, he was given a total sentence of 203 years and is currently serving life behind bars at the Clinton Correctional Facility. While in prison, it's believed he bumped into another mass murderer, Colin Ferguson, and they had an argument about which of them was the better killer. Joel Rifkin is often categorized as a classic organized serial killer who methodically planned his crimes. His victims were selected based on their vulnerability, and his disposal methods evolved as he learned from past mistakes. Despite his intellectual ability, his failure to form meaningful relationships, his obsession with serial killers, and his history of being bullied contributed to his violent tendencies. Psychologists have debated Rifkin's motives, with some suggesting that he derived pleasure from the act of killing, while others believe he was attempting to exert power over those he perceived as weaker. His ability to function in society while committing heinous crimes highlights the complexity of his psyche. His case is often compared to other serial killers like Ted Bundy and Arthur Shawcross, who also targeted women they viewed as disposable. Joel Rifkin remains one of New York's most notorious serial killers. His methodical approach, lack of remorse, and ability to evade capture for 4 years make him a chilling figure in criminal history. Now serving a life sentence, he will be eligible for parole in 2197 at the age of 238. His crimes serve as a stark reminder of the dangers faced by society's most vulnerable members and the difficulty of identifying serial offenders before they claim multiple lives.